no country is more important than the United States in resolving these climate change issues.
The Senate Foreign Relations Committee hosted an important guest some weeks back. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is a strong voice on the need for mandated changes in greenhouse gas emissions. But climate change legislation, which passed the U.S. House of Representatives, appears stalled in the Senate, in line behind health care and financial services reform. The bills would require cuts in U.S. CO2 emissions. Democratic Senator John Kerry says passage before Copenhagen won't happen.
We are engaged in a process that will hopefully put us in a position to go to Copenhagen with an outline of where the Senate will be heading in its legislation on the floor of the Senate.
Climate policy analyst Jake Smith says passing strong legislation promptly is crucial if the U.S. is to be a leader on the environment.
Well, clearly, before we're really credible players in the international eyes, we have to have domestic legislation that enforces our commitments.
The White House says the president will propose at Copenhagen a U.S. emissions reduction target of 17% below 2005 levels by 2020. David Kreutzer is an economist who tracks climate change for the Conservative Heritage Foundation. He says the Senate bill faces hurdles, much like the bill in the House did.
One of the problems is that the Waxman-Markey bill that won in the House passed by only 7 votes after a lot of wheeling and dealing and horse trading and so on. And that was right before the 4th of July break. It turned out it was fairly unpopular when legislators went home.
Kreutzer and other conservatives insist that legislation curbing CO2 emissions will cost the U.S. economy trillions of dollars and do little to bring down global temperature. Kreutzer urges President Obama to just say no in Copenhagen to binding mandates.
The leadership that we should offer is to say, this is a bad deal, this cutting carbon. All right? It imposes costs on the world economy that far exceed any benefits.
Kreutzer is also against proposals for developed countries to help fund the cleanup of developing nations.
The citizens of the United States are not at all convinced that we have a global warming problem that's severe enough for a blank check solution.
Environmentalists like the Earth Policy Institute's Janet Larson say this is dangerous talk. She's attending the conference in Copenhagen.
The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is at about 387 parts per million. That's a level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that the world may not have seen for the last 50 million years. So we're clearly moving into uncharted territory.
One of the goals of Copenhagen is to lay the groundwork for an international treaty that would bind nations in the area of climate change. The Senate would have to ratify the treaty for it to take effect in the U.S. Laurel, Bowman, VOA News, Washington.